Hey everybody, my name is Luke. Welcome to my BookTube channel. To be honest with you, before we start, I am incredibly nervous about this because I've been a lifelong reader, really like reading books, I like interpreting books, and I like talking to bookish people, so I want to do it right. And the longer that I was thinking about it, the more I thought, well, I should incorporate this and I should do that. And I was really waiting for all the stars to align before I figured that if I keep waiting, I'm never gonna do it. So with that in mind, I just decided that today is the day. It's a beautiful day outside, so I figured I would record outside. Also, my office is a mess, so here we are. Originally, I was going to cover all of the books that I've read in May, but there's a lot of books, and they require some serious conversation, so the video turned out to be over an hour long, and my wife, who is very smart, suggested that maybe that's a little long, especially for an introductory video, so I figured we would just pare it down to this week's books, and that starts with Christopher Moore's Island of the Sequined Love Nun. Christopher Moore is my favorite author. His newest book, Razzmatazz, came out very recently. I am still waiting for my copy from Books Incorporated. And I think that he writes the best situations, just in general. There's something he does where everything feels light. Even the more difficult things, the more serious things, deaths, murders, vampires, horrible things. But there's always a sense, I wouldn't say of levity. He's not making jokes about this, even though he does write very funny stuff. It's more like there's a distance from it. It's similar to authors like Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams, where there's a level of being able to observe the situation and appreciate the ridiculousness of it, I suppose. It would probably be the best way to describe it. Anyway, his new book came out, and I'm super pumped about it. I have signed copies of all of his books except for The Griff, and I'm pretty stoked to read Razzmatazz, so I decided that now is the perfect time to do a reread of all of his books. And I wanted to start with Island of the Sequined Love Nun because it is the one that I remember the least out of all of his books. I've read most of his books more than once, but I haven't read Island of the Sequined Love Nun or Fluke more than once. So I'm excited to get back into it and see what it was. And honestly, this book is great. I love religious satire. Speaking of Terry Pratchett, Good Omens was a really good example of religious satire, and I think that Island of the Sequined Love Nun doesn't get enough attention when compared to his other books, because his other books offer cuter things that people latch onto more easily. But I think that there's definitely some space here and justification to read Island of the Sequined Love Nun, because it really does tackle religion and all of its trappings. But my favorite thing about it is that Christopher Moore writes very smart and with a super fine touch. A lot of what he writes could become offensive so quickly, and you read his work and you could see the tightrope that he's walking, where if he veers just a little bit more, it'll tumble into the offensive. But everything he does is treated with respect, even if it's on the ridiculous side. In this case, we talk about an island where there's a lot of indigenous people. The indigenous people, it would be so easy for somebody to try to paint a picture of indigenous people in a less than flattering light. Not so with Christopher Moore. He does a really great job with it. After that, I read Feminism Is for Everybody, which is a very good book. I feel like it would be improper for somebody who the book was not really written for to offer any sort of critique on it. I will say that it is a very interesting book. I appreciated being able to read somebody else's perspective and somebody else's experiences. It's an enlightening thing. I think we need to do more of it. But with this book in particular, it made me want to tackle the idea of feminism more here, because I think that it's worth talking about. Feminism, when you do research on it, feminism has come in big waves, but that's not to say that there's nothing between those waves. And there's also nothing to say that those waves are mostly categorized by caricatures that have been pushed on you by different organizations, be it the first wave of feminism, where makeup companies were scared that women would stop wearing makeup and stop caring about how they looked and stop buying their products, and therefore make the companies go into bankruptcy. So they launched campaigns talking about how silly it was, how inappropriate it was for somebody to not care about having a face that's fully made up, or to be looking their absolute best all the time, especially in consideration to the male gaze. In the 90s, feminism was largely looked at as butch, flannel-wearing lesbians, and I feel like this is mostly because of comedians, and that is also a caricature of feminism. In general, I think that feminism is most easily described or defined as just equality. But the thing that gets me is when I think about feminism, I imagine a daughter inside a house being raised by a parent or parents, and the completely ridiculously huge line of dudes waiting right outside that door to either tell her what to do, to tell her how to act, to tell her how to dress, to tell her how to work, to punish her for perceived crimes, not just from her, but of her sex in general. And it's irritating is not a strong enough word for it. It's deeply upsetting for me. It's not crazy. You could absolutely see this happening from girls being dress coded in school. They're not allowed to wear tank tops. Boys are allowed to wear tank tops. They're not allowed to wear short shorts. Boys are allowed to wear short shorts. And when you ask why, they go, oh, well, it's because boys couldn't control themselves. It's distracting for boys. Okay. That sounds like a problem with the boys, right? Not a problem with the girls. Why are you punishing the girls for the distractibility of the boys? This doesn't make any sense to me. But outside of that, you have boys who are like hitting or pushing, shoving girls, and their teachers are saying, oh, this is just a way of them to say that they like you, and that sends wildly mixed messages, but also sets people up to accept that violence is an appropriate language for love. And then you have teenage boys that are waiting to relentlessly pursue sex at the expense of everything else, possibly reach into the grab bag of guilting women into it. And then you have bosses that ogle the employees, sexual assault, sexual harassment. You have restrictions on reproductive rights. You have all sorts of stuff that isn't being thrown on men. It's just on women, and it pisses me off. Like, the idea that there are people who aren't feminists is kind of mind-blowing. So that's what I think when I think feminism, and that's why I think that feminism is a topic worth pursuing. Even if you don't have a daughter, just imagining a daughter. If you have sons, then you should start thinking about feminism and how you should use that lens to raise your sons to not be in that line of dudes that are waiting to try to control somebody else's daughter. Like, it should be part of the solution, So I think that this is a very important book to read, mostly because it offers perspectives that are possibly not in your realm. Like, you didn't have to go through this stuff. As a middle-aged white dude, I didn't have to go through any of this stuff, and life's been more easy for me than it has been for bell hooks or just about any woman. So you should absolutely read this book so that you can be more informed in your day-to-day actions and hopefully make the world a better place, little by little. The next book was 99 Fear Street, The House of Evil, The First Horror, which is a crazy title. And one of the things that I've noticed about reading R.L. Stine, which this year has been a lot of reading R.L. Stine, for reasons that I'll go into at a later date, but I'm older and my imagination has been eroded by the real world, so some of the crazier twists I don't see coming. The ending of this I didn't see coming. It was good. It was an interesting story. The really good parts about this book is that R.L. Stine writes chaos better in this book than in any of the books from him that I've read before. The characters are they have a young brother, and he is the worst. Like, just the most annoying, selfish character out there. There's a scene where the bathroom sink starts bubbling up all this green gunk, and it smells awful, and it won't stop. Like, it's just overflowing out of the sink onto the floor. Dad's trying to fix it up. The twins are trying to fix it up. They're trying to get a handle on the situation, but it's not just bubbling up. And the son comes up, and he says, "Oh, I can hear the barks of my dog who had disappeared. They can't find him. They're pretty sure he's somewhere in the house, maybe in the walls." At this point, it's just disembodied, miserable howls and wails and barks, all that. But now is the time for him to say, "Oh, I can hear the dog. We need to find the dog. There's a sink that's bubbling up with all sorts of trash. We need to take care of this." And he's like, no, the dog. And then the mom comes out of the bedroom, and she's covered in blood because she was in bed, and then from the ceiling, blood comes down on her, and she comes out covered in blood, and the son still says, "We gotta find the dog. He's my dog. I miss him. Cubby. Oh, bleh. There's like, your mom is covered in blood, dude. Jeez. Oh, there's priorities. But anyway, like, in this one page, such chaos. And it's written so well that you genuinely feel like, oh my God, what is going on? And it's really fun to read. This is probably one of the best Fear Street books I've ever read. It's a lot of fun. The next book is The Gift of Forgiveness by Katherine Schwarzenegger Pratt. And I thought that it was going to be more interesting than it turned out being. The idea that I thought what I was walking into was a how to forgive kind of book, like a guide, a self-development kind of book. And what I got instead was barely a guide, but mostly told through the stories of people who have either given forgiveness, need forgiveness, or were forgiven. And there were a lot of stories, a whole lot of stories, and some of them were a little nuts. A lot of them were kind of leaned to the religious. And overall, I thought that the book was pretty boring until Sue Klebold's story came up. And if you don't know, Sue Klebold is the mother of Dylan Klebold, who was one of the shooters at Columbine. And she had very interesting things to say about forgiveness. The whole book is saying that forgiveness is good for you. It doesn't need to be rushed, because you shouldn't. And it needs to be for you and not for the other person. Basically, forgiveness is a gift from yourself to yourself, basically allowing you to give up all of the bad feelings, the anger, the grief, the hostility, and proceed with life happier and less weighed down, which is fine. Sue Klebold's take on that is that forgiveness is one of the most narcissistic and selfish things you could possibly do. And this makes sense. I mean, just think about what I described. Like, you are doing this for yourself. So, of course, it's a selfish act. You're letting yourself off the hook as far as grudges go. And after that, she says that she doesn't want anyone's forgiveness. People come up to her all the time and say, I forgive you. She doesn't think that she's done anything wrong. I will come back to that in just a bit. She says that the only person she wants forgiveness from is her son, Dylan, for not seeing the red flags and not knowing enough about mental health to be able to identify those red flags and then pursue fixes for it. So it was pretty interesting. She also said that when it comes to forgiveness, she thinks that all people are equal. And when you introduce the concept of forgiveness, you introduce an inequality as well, because the forgiver is automatically in a superior position to bestow the forgiveness to the forgiven. And she thinks that this is largely artificial. But it makes sense, because how often have you heard growing up that you need to be the bigger person, you need to be the one to forgive? I mean, if you're the bigger person, then automatically there's an inequality there, right? So she has a point. She has a very good point. But it's here at this point in the book when I really struggled. There was a big dissonance between my brain, where I was thinking logically that no parent can know everything that's going on in their kids' lives. The kids can be very good at hiding things from their parents, and you never really know. So with that in mind, what happened to Sue Klebold after the shooting was pretty rough. The only reason the family was gone after as hard as they were was because Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were dead and the public couldn't get a hold of them. There could be no trial by the people, so they just went after the parents. And this feels unfair logically, but inside, the emotions, like, I remember when Columbine happened, and it was a big deal. The ramifications immediately after, not just in Colorado by reports, but everywhere in America, like, everything changed for all sorts of students. If you were the kid that didn't really fit in with the crowds, or you listened to metal, or you played Doom, like all of the things that the news was telling you, this was why they went in and shot up a school. If you did any of those things, then suddenly you were ostracized at school the very next day. You were being called out for being part of a trenchcoat mafia that you were not part of. And reading this, I didn't even realize that I had a ton of baggage about it, but the emotions of everything, like, I barely considered these kids to be human. They were monsters. They killed other kids. Like, this is a big thing, and it was a huge moment. And I didn't like the dissonance between those two things. Like, logically, I know that Sue Klebold shouldn't have been held to such a discriminating level, but emotionally, I had a lot of feelings. I felt a way about it. But this deserves investigation. Emotion should be investigated. So I downloaded Sue Klebold's book, which is called A Mother's Reckoning, and I'm about 20% through it, and I love it. It's super enlightening. We'll get into it later, but I wouldn't have remembered that Sue Klebold had a book if it weren't for this book, and I probably wouldn't have pursued it at all if it hadn't been for the chapter in this book, because Catherine Schwarzenegger Pratt says that the proceeds of the book go toward mental health charities, and that really tipped the scales for me, because I feel like tell-all books in general, like not knowing the book before I went into it, I feel like tell-all books were very much cash grabs, and I was intrigued by the fact that it wasn't a cash grab in this situation. So I downloaded it. It's gonna be good, I promise. But it's that story, like that one chapter is worth cost of admission for The Gift of Forgiveness for sure. Okay, next up, 99 Fear Street, The House of Evil, the second horror. This is book 2, I want to say, of 3, and it's interesting. There are 2 twists to it, both of which, well, one of which I kind of saw coming, and the other one I absolutely did not. Like, it's crazy. Like, you just don't. You just, as when you're older, you just don't find yourself thinking, oh man, what's the craziest thing that could possibly happen? Like, that's R.L. Stine's job, I guess, and you're just going along for the ride. But one of the characters, the protagonist in the story, his parents keep saying that he has a condition. He keeps mentioning that he has a condition, and they don't want him trying out for sports because of his condition. But he does anyway. He signs up for the basketball team, and then he gets nailed, and then a bruise appears, and it's way worse than the foul should have caused. And the coach is really concerned about it, and the kid's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's gonna be fine." But in his head, he's like, "Oh man, my condition." As an older dude, I was thinking, what condition could it be that that would make a kid bruise like this? And I thought maybe anemia, maybe that's his condition. Maybe he's just really worried about the public perception of having anemia. But I was wrong. It was not anemia. I'll give you a couple seconds. Just want you to think about it. Just close your eyes. Kid bruises easily. He's really worried about other people finding out about his condition. What could it be? And then I'll spoil it for you. I'll spoil it. He's dead. Yep. I never saw it coming. He died on a Polynesian island and was resuscitated using the body of a drifter. That's his condition. How about that? And it wasn't as fun as the first book, but it was intriguing enough that I'm going to try to track down the third one. It's tough to find those old Fear Street books. They were never made to be durable. Some libraries have turned them into hardcovers like this, but even these are starting to get eaten up by time. So they're just getting harder and harder. And it's not like Goosebumps. Goosebumps were wildly popular, and you could find those books all day long. But Fear Streets, they're tough. Speaking of, the next book is Halloween Night. I'll put up a bigger picture. When I was a kid, the cover of Halloween Night 2, that looked really interesting, but I couldn't read it because I didn't have Halloween Night 1. I hadn't read it. Could not find Halloween Night 1 to save my life. And I took the kids to the library just recently. I found a huge stack of R.L. Stine books, of them Halloween Night and Halloween Night 2. So picked them up and brought them home. I've had a good time reading them. Halloween Night, it's unfair of me to expect R.L. Stine to write scarier books based on an established scarier day, like Halloween. Like, Kid Luke would have ranked them in his, like, in my mind, I would say, well, Halloween Night, that's got to be the scariest book that he's ever written because it takes place on Halloween. Boom! Not true. Halloween Night is largely a teenage drama about a girl whose parents are going through a particularly rough divorce, so they are fighting so much that they send the girl to live with her cousin's family, and while there, a bunch of weird stuff happens, a bunch of threatening messages are written. If you've read R.L. Stine books, you know how this goes. And then in the end, there's a twist. And the twist was not super satisfying because he laid the groundwork for it, probably 5 pages before the twist was revealed. And it wasn't, I don't know, it didn't feel particularly good. I was pretty glad to leave it. And then I moved on to Halloween Night 2, which was even less appealing. Mostly because of this thing that R.L. Stine does with his series, where in the first one, we've established a character arc, characters have grown and developed, they've become better people, they've learned the errors of their ways, yada, yada, yada. But then book 2 comes out, and everybody gets reset to square one. In this case, the cousin is still around because her parents were so shitty that they both lost custody, and she was basically adopted by the family from the first book. These 2 cousins, who are both similar ages, ended book 1 getting along. They realized that there was a lot of miscommunication and a lot of emotional stuff going on, mostly on the cousin's part, because their parents were going through a rough divorce. Everybody copes differently through it. And then I don't know, I don't want to say a disposable story because that's really rude, feels like, but it was not what I expected it to be. Look at this cover. It looks awesome. Why was it not awesome? Also, the thing that really bothers me about Halloween Night 1, to a lesser extent 2, is that it relies on the trope of a child of divorce being 2 steps away from snapping, or of a child of divorce already going nuts because of it. And I feel like this trope being pushed by stories, not just in Stine's case, but like everywhere, it really does a discredit to children of divorce, because there are plenty of kids out there whose parents have divorced and they've had enough wherewithal to realize that their parents are happier apart, and happier parents make for better living conditions. The idea that you would live in the same house as people who are absolutely miserable together and constantly sniping at each other, or having you play a referee, like, this is not fun. And yet, because of all these stories, there's a real presence of the let's stay together for the kids mentality, and that is bullshit. Like, you should absolutely not stay together for the kids. If you're miserable, you should get out of there, and then the kids will reap the benefits from that decision, and it's a good decision to make. And that's it. Those are the books that I've read this week. I'm currently reading Halloween Party by R.L. Stine. I want to say I'm like 10 pages in, so the title escapes me, but I know that this cover is bananas, and that's fun. I'm also reading Sue Klebold's book, A Mother's Reckoning, as well as the book 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And between the social media book, Sue Klebold's book, and the forgiveness book, these 3 books pair together very well to make what I think is going to be a pretty solid argument, to take a breather and think about where we are right now as a society and try to change some things moving forward. I think that there's enough distance from the Columbine shooting to look at it more rationally. But also, Columbine is one of the instances where it's black and white, you know? Like, people know exactly how they feel, and they have strong feelings, and these feelings are kind of cast in concrete. So now is the time to start breaking that concrete up and analyzing why it was formed in the first place. And if we could shake the thoughts about Columbine, this thing that supposedly was solid, then we might be able to change perceptions about other things now that's probably more relevant. It's gonna be fun. All right, now I'm really excited about this part. This is the part of the video where I'm contractually obligated by YouTube to ask you, please like this video, comment with your thoughts on the books or what you're reading right now. BookTube says that I should ask you to leave an emoji. Let's put a ghost emoji out there, huh? Why not? Because of R.L. Stine. But this is the part where all of that needs to happen, and you all know how that works, right? Like, nobody needs to explain to you that I would really appreciate it if you liked, commented, and subscribed. But here's the part that I'm really excited about. I have this friend named Sarah, and she is a great human being. She said that whenever she watches BookTube videos or looks at Bookstagram or whatever, she's always looking at the bookshelves in the back to see what books are on those shelves. So I'm gonna call this section Sarah's bookshelf, and it's one shelf completely devoid of anything blocking the books, except for decorations, I suppose. Just for her. You can enjoy it too, but this is for her. This is Sarah's bookshelf, and here you go. She probably has finished reading all of the spines in this time. So I hope you like it, Sarah. I hope that you don't mind other people looking at this shelf. Thank you very much for your patience. I'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Goodbye.